The fire smelled of cedar and grief, and Orla Trevane did not look away. She stood in the parlor doorway and watched her mother's music burn. Sheet by sheet, Maud fed the compositions into the hearth. 60 years of Gwyneth Trevane's hand, the careful notation, the marginal notes in violet ink that Orla had memorized like scripture. The prelude in D minor Gwyneth had been too ill to finish, the one Orla had completed at 14 from memory of her mother's humming. Gone. The set of parlor songs dedicated on their title pages to my dearest G.T., and to our daughter who sings them better than I ever did. Gone. Thieves don't deserve keepsakes, Maud said, not looking up. Her daughter Flora sat in the window seat and watched with the bright, still eyes of a cat watching something small in the grass. Orla had not stolen anything, she had simply sung. That was all she had done. Stood in the front pew at her father's memorial service 2 weeks before and sung the Trevane Lament, her mother's most celebrated composition, because she was 22 years old and Geoffrey was dead and music was the only prayer she had left. The village had gone quiet in that church. Old Mrs. Peel from the mill had wept into her handkerchief. The visiting organist had stopped playing and stared. And afterward, in the churchyard, 3 people told Maud separately that the girl sang exactly like Gwyneth Trevane, exactly like her, God rest that woman's soul, as if she'd stepped clean out of her grave. Maud had said nothing in the churchyard. She had smiled and accepted condolences and laid one black-gloved hand on Orla's shoulder. That night, she had taken the music. You must understand what the previous 3 years had been. Geoffrey Trevane, a gentleman, a decent one, a man who kept his first wife's portrait on his desk until the day he died, had married Maud Selby when Orla was 18, a widow from Bath, charming in drawing rooms, meticulous behind closed doors. She came with a daughter, Flora, 1 year younger than Orla, pretty and fair, and possessed of a smile that never reached her eyes. Geoffrey had not been foolish. He had consulted his solicitors before the marriage and his true will, witnessed by Mr. Lacey of Exeter, a copy lodged with the firm, named Orla sole heir to Trevane House and its grounds upon her 21st birthday, with a modest provision for Maud. But Geoffrey had been sick the last year, and Maud had been very thorough. By the time he died, there was another will, a simpler one that left everything in Maud's management until Orla contracted a suitable marriage. And who would arrange that marriage? Who controlled the dowry money? Who held every key in the house? Orla had understood within a fortnight. She cooked, she cleaned. She pressed Flora's gowns and filled teacups and disappeared from drawing rooms when visitors called. Maud told people she was not quite well. Nerves, she said, tapping her temple in the way that closed doors. Poor girl had never been right since her mother's death. Artistic temperament gone sour. One didn't engage her directly. Orla endured it because she was one woman alone in a house with no living relatives and no money, and the magistrate's office was 6 miles of bad road, and the word of the widow Trevane against the word of a girl Maud had already begun, quietly, to describe as unstable. She had kept one thing from her mother. A small copybook, its cover worn smooth, inside it the melody lines of 7 songs in Gwyneth's hand, with Orla's childhood pencil annotations in the margins. Orla kept it sewn into the lining of her gray wool coat, because the coat was too plain for Maud to want and too old for Flora to covet. She still had the coat when the last page burned. When the last ash settled, Maud straightened and said, without inflection, "The Duke of Dunraven has opened Ravenmere Hall, a musical fortnight, entertainments, an evening concert, a supper ball. Every family of standing in the county is invited." A pause. "You will come as Flora's companion." Orla said nothing. "You will not speak in company unless spoken to. You will not sing. You will tell anyone who asks that you are recovering from a nervous illness and that your voice has been compromised. You will keep your eyes down and your mouth shut and stay in the servants' corridor unless Flora requires you." Maud's voice was pleasant, the way still water is pleasant over rocks you cannot see. "And you will not, under any circumstances, play or touch any instrument on that property. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." She did not understand at the time why Maud was bringing her rather than leaving her home. It was only later, lying awake in a narrow room at the top of Ravenmere Hall, that she understood. Maud did not dare leave her out of sight. She had not brought Orla despite the risk of recognition. She had brought her because the risk of Orla speaking to someone unsupervised was worse. Ravenmere Hall stood on the Somerset coast and deserved every word said about it. 3 stories of pale limestone gone gold in the afternoon sun, the sea behind it, the grounds rolling to the cliff edge. The Duke of Dunraven had kept the house closed 4 years, while he settled his late mother's estate, and now the windows were lit and the gravel swept, and 30 families of the county were arriving in a crush of carriages and hat boxes. Orla rode on the outside of the Trevane carriage in the September cool and was pointed toward the servants' entrance before the horses had fully stopped. She was carrying Flora's dressing case and a hat box and a wrapped bundle of sheet music when she turned down the wrong corridor and found herself in the marble entrance hall, nearly empty. Just a tall man in a dark coat consulting a ledger with his steward, speaking too quietly to carry. He looked up when she appeared. He had the kind of face that would trouble a painter. Sharp at the jaw, something unfinished about the eyes, like a question not yet asked. "You're in the wrong wing," he said, not unkindly. "I know, I'm sorry." She shifted the hat box. "I'll find my way." "The servant's stair is through that door and left." He paused. "Is that music?" She looked down at the wrapped bundle in her arms, Flora's sheet music, parlor arrangements for pianoforte. "My mistress's," she said. Something in his expression changed, very slightly, the way a man sharpens when he hears something he didn't expect. "Of course," he said, and went back to his ledger. She spent the next 3 days in the service corridors. Ravenmere Hall was a musical house. The Duke's late mother had been the county's most generous patron of the arts, and the fortnight reflected it. Mornings of chamber music, afternoons of organized sight reading in the great music room, evenings of more formal performance. Every family had brought their most accomplished daughter, and the music room rang from after breakfast until the dressing hour. Flora played competently and looked pretty doing it. Orla pressed gowns and counted buttons, and sat in the narrow passage outside the music room door and listened. She had taught herself, in 3 years of Trevane House, to make a room at the back of her mind where music lived behind glass, where it could not pull at her. But this house was full of it, and the piano in the music room was old and honestly kept, and through the door she could hear things she had not let herself hear in years. And there were scores on the library shelves. She found that on the second afternoon, passing through the east corridor with fresh linen, the library door stood open. She stopped without deciding to stop, the same way she had stopped in the church doorway 3 years before, when she heard the organist testing her mother's lament. Most of the scores on the shelf were familiar names. 3 were bound in plain brown paper with no title printed on the spine. She pulled the first one out before her better sense could stop her. The handwriting on the title page was violet ink, the notation precise, slightly left-leaning, with small loops on the quaver tails that Orla had spent 14 years unconsciously imitating. 6 songs for voice and pianoforte, composed by G. Trevane, summer of 1861, with gratitude to the House of Dunraven for its shelter and its silence. Orla's hands went completely still. She opened to the second song, in the margin of the 4th bar in her mother's hand. "Too slow here, Orla will know." And then below it, in lighter pencil, in a child's unpracticed script that was her own, aged perhaps 7. "Yes, Mama, I know." She had been here. Gwyneth had sat in this library and written these songs, and Orla had sat beside her with a pencil. She had been too young to remember anything but the feeling. Warmth, paper smell, someone humming softly nearby. "That volume isn't catalogued." The voice came from the doorway, not sharp, not accusing, just factual. The Duke of Dunraven stood in his shirt sleeves, a book in one hand, watching her with careful attention, the way a man watches a door that has moved when he expected it to stay still. She put the score back on the shelf. "I beg your pardon. I thought the corridor was open. I know. I left it open." He came into the room and stood at the opposite end of the shelf. His eyes went to where the score sat, then back to her. "You know that volume." "I don't, Your Grace." The lie came out smooth, the way lies come when you've been made to tell them until they live at the front of your mouth. "The handwriting caught my eye. It's unusual." He pulled the score from the shelf himself, opened it to the title page. "Read it." "G. Trevane," he said. "Do you know who that is?" "No, Your Grace." He looked at her. She looked at the floor. The score in his hands contained her mother's handwriting and her own child's pencil note in the margin, and she had looked a duke in the face and lied about knowing it. Something in the room told her it was the right instinct, the way your hand pulls back from a flame before you have registered the heat. "The far door leads to the servants' corridor," he said at last, quietly. He set the score down on the table rather than returning it to the shelf. "Take it in future." She curtsied and went. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the narrow room and pressed her hand against the coat lining where the copybook sat, and thought about Orla will know, and tried to understand what her mother had been doing in this house before the world shrank to Trevane House and 3 years of gray wool. On the 4th morning, Maud planted the brooch. Flora's brooch, garnets in silver, pretty, and not particularly valuable. It appeared in Orla's apron pocket while she was pressing a gown, and she felt the cold weight of it and did not reach in, because she already knew from the weight and from 3 years of kitchens what it meant. She carried the gown upstairs and said nothing. 20 minutes later, Maud came into the music room where several guests were assembled, Flora weeping convincingly at her shoulder, and announced that a piece of jewelry had gone missing from her daughter's room and had been found tucked into the gray girl's apron. She said gray girl, not Orla, not their companion. "This is not the first time," Maud told the room in the voice she used for things she had rehearsed. "We have tried patience, we have tried charity. The girl is," she lowered her voice, "not enough, not entirely stable. I warned the housekeeper she ought not to be left unsupervised." The Duke was present. He stood at the edge of the room. He said nothing. Maud held the brooch out to him, not to the housekeeper, not to anyone else. To him, deliberately, because a stolen item on a duke's estate was a duke's matter, and his authority would give it weight. He took it, looked at it, said, "Of course," and then said that the house was disordered, and a matter of this kind would be better addressed in 2 days when his steward could take proper statements. He said Orla was not to leave the grounds in the interim. Maud swept out. Orla stood against the wall with the familiar cold feeling of a closing door. The Duke, just before he turned, she caught it only for a second, looked at the brooch in his palm with an expression she could not read. She did not know yet what he had seen. She knew only that the Selbys took her back to their rooms that afternoon, and she spent the night listening to Maud's voice through the wall, low and continuous, making arrangements. They left the following morning, Orla on the outside of the carriage in the rain. She was turned out of Trevane House the next dawn. Her carpet bag dropped at her feet by the parlor maid, who would not meet her eyes. "The magistrate?" Orla asked. "There won't be a magistrate," Maud said from the step. "You'll simply be gone. I've written to every household in the county. If you come within 10 miles of this address, the letter goes to the constable and it names candlesticks." She tilted her head, almost kindly. "Walk west." Orla walked. 2 miles out she remembered the coat with the copybook in the lining. She stopped on the wet road and took 3 slow breaths and kept walking, because going back was not a choice she had. She had 2 shillings in her hem and a name of a church 12 miles west. Her mother was buried there. She had not seen the grave in 3 years. Geoffrey had told her once. A small churchyard, a stone with a carved treble clef. Gwyneth had wanted that. She thought it would make her daughter smile. At Ravenmere Hall, 40 miles behind her, and closing faster than she knew, Fletcher Dunraven sat in his late mother's sitting room. With a letter he had read so many times, the paper had gone soft as cloth. "My dear Fletcher," his mother had written in her last winter, "I must ask something of you before I am too tired to ask it properly. 25 years ago, a young woman came to Ravenmere as a music teacher. Her name was Gwyneth Trevane. She was my dearest friend for 7 years, and I failed her, and I have not forgiven myself. Your father wanted the post given elsewhere. Words were exchanged. When a silver music stand went missing from the hall, a valuable piece engraved with the family crest. Your father accused Gwyneth of taking it. She denied it. He dismissed her without a character and threatened the magistrate if she ever wrote to me again. She had no money and no family of consequence, and she could not fight him. I obeyed. I didn't write. I let her go. 3 years before I am writing this, word reached me that she had died in Wiltshire and had left a daughter. The daughter's name is Orla. What is in the music room shelf belongs to her. The compositions, and a packet I have sealed behind the false panel, 3rd score from the left. The stand was in your grandfather's lumber room all along. Your father knew. I cannot prove he arranged the whole of it, but I know what I know. Find her, Fletcher. Gwyneth had amber eyes. Her daughter will be the same. He had spent 2 years searching without her surname. He had opened the house to find her. He had located the false panel the afternoon the Selbys departed. Inside, a copy of Geoffrey Trevane's true will lodged with Lacey and Sons of Exeter, naming Orla sole heir upon her 21st birthday, a birthday that had passed 14 months ago. Beside it, Gwyneth's last letter, smuggled out with no address but with a name, a village, a church, and a pressed flower, small, lavender-colored, the kind that grew along the Somerset coast in June. He had turned the brooch over in his hand and read the engraving on the back, "G.T., from your Ravenmere girls, with love," and understood then the full shape of what Maud had done, not merely theft, erasure. Years of it, careful and unhurried. He had ridden west by 11 o'clock. The villages passed him one by one in the gray afternoon. At the 3rd inn, the innkeeper's wife remembered a girl, quiet, wet through, worn boots, who had asked the road. She said she had somewhere she needed to be, the woman told him. She said it like she meant it. The church appeared on the far side of a low hill, a flint-walled building with a copper beech turning color at the yard's edge. He left his horse at the lych gate and went through on foot and found the stone quickly. There was only one with a treble clef, small and dark and well-tended. Gwyneth Trevane, beloved. Below it, in smaller letters, the opening phrase of the lament in notation. 5 notes, but enough. The churchyard was empty. He stood at the stone and felt it settle through him like cold water. He had come too late. He had no way of knowing by how much. You've muddied your boots quite thoroughly. He turned. She stood at the edge of the copper beech's shadow in a gray dress, wet at the hem, one hand on the trunk. He had seen her twice at Ravenmere Hall, both times for less than 2 minutes. He looked at her properly now. His mother had written amber eyes. In the flat churchyard light, they were exactly that. "I wasn't certain you'd come," she said. "And then I thought, the brooch. Did you turn it over?" He had. He told her everything then, standing at her mother's stone in the thin late sun. The panel, the will, the silver stand buried 30 years in a lumber room. What Gwyneth had written. What his mother had written. What Mr. Lacey had said when presented with the true will alongside the county probate record, which had proved a document that bore signatures no church register could locate. He told her what it all meant for Trevane House, and for the woman who had held it. He watched her face as he talked. She did not weep. She stood very still, the way a person stands when they are trying to hold something large without dropping it. "The house," she said at last, "yours has been since you were 21. Everything Maud has spent, she will answer for." Orla looked down at the 5 engraved notes. "In the library, my mother wrote in the margin, 'Orla will know. I was 7 when we sat in that room. I didn't remember until I saw her handwriting.'" "I know." He paused. "When you said you didn't know the composer, I knew it wasn't true. I should have been quicker. I let them take you because I was trying to be careful, and careful was the wrong instinct." He said it plainly, without excusing it. She looked at him then, directly for the first time since the entrance hall. "You came," she said. The musical evening at Ravenmere Hall was 4 days later. Maud received his written invitation for herself, for Flora, and for Miss Orla Trevane. This last phrased with a particular formality that left no graceful way to refuse. She came because she had no choice, and because his note had been warm and unhurried, nothing in it of urgency, and she believed. The storm she had feared had somehow passed her by, that Orla had gone onto the road and disappeared and would stay disappeared, that the invitation was simply propriety. She walked in at 7:30 with Flora on her arm and found the room full. 40 guests for the evening's concert, chairs before the raised dais at the end of the music room, candles along every surface, the old Broadwood grand open and waiting. At 8 o'clock, when every seat was filled, the far door opened. The Duke came in, and Orla Trevane came in beside him. She wore no gray. The gown was dark blue, borrowed, simple against the room's silk and froth. Her hair, which had been pinned flat and hidden under servants' caps for 3 years, was up, loosely, the way a young woman wears it when she has stopped pretending to be an afterthought. She walked with her spine straight, and her eyes level, and her hands still at her sides. Maud's fan snapped shut. The Duke led Orla to the front of the room, and then he stepped back, and Mr. Lacey of Exeter stepped forward and spoke briefly, clearly, the way solicitors speak when they have documents, and the other party does not. He spoke about a will. He spoke about a panel and a silver stand found in the lumber room. He spoke about the name Gwyneth Trevane, which perhaps some of the older guests would recall. She had spent 7 summers at Ravenmere Hall as music teacher, and composed 6 songs for it, and had been wrongly dismissed, and the wrong was now a matter of public record. The room had gone very still. Then the Duke said, "Miss Trevane." Orla sat down at the Broadwood. She had not touched a piano in more than a year. She had not sung in company since the church. She put her hands on the keys and felt them, cool and certain under her palms, and she played the opening phrase of the lament, her mother's melody, the 5 notes cut into the stone 12 miles west, and opened her mouth and sang. She sang the whole of it. Her voice was not warmed, not dressed in anything but itself, and it filled the room the way the tide fills a harbor, without effort, without asking permission. An old woman near the window pressed both hands over her mouth. Mrs. Carew, the estate housekeeper, who had been standing at the back for propriety's sake, sat down suddenly in an empty chair and turned her face away. Maud stood through all of it. When the last note settled into the particular silence that means something true has been said, the Duke began to applaud. Not theatrically, steadily, the way a man means it." The room followed, and Orla sat at the piano and kept her chin level and let it come. What followed was law, and law takes time, but the short of it was this. The true will prevailed, Trevane House was restored, and Maud Selby departed the county before the season ended with nothing in her trunks that could be traced to a dead woman's daughter. There was no criminal charge. Orla did not press for one, and when people asked why, she said only that her mother had spent her last years carrying bitterness alongside a failing body, and she had no intention of doing the same. That was the part the county remembered longest after the singing. 2 years on, Trevane House had a new copper plaque beside the front door. The Trevane School of Music. The pianos were second-hand and the east wing roof required attention in heavy rain. But the girls who came to learn, girls without income, without references, without anyone willing to sign their letters, left with their own compositions catalogued and protected, and a recommendation in the Duchess of Dunraven's hand that no music establishment in 3 counties had yet declined. On a bright morning of the second spring, Orla sat in the music room and listened to a 12-year-old work through a waltz she had composed herself. Haltingly, not quite in time, with the particular concentrated frown of someone working out a problem that matters deeply to her. The copybook was on the shelf behind Orla. She had retrieved it from the coat lining the week she moved back into Trevane House, and she had given Gwyneth's compositions to Mr. Lacey to lodge with the Exeter Music Library, properly catalogued under the name they had always deserved. The copybook itself she kept. She read it sometimes at night, the 7 melodies, the violet notes, her own child's pencil marks, the record of a morning in a library by the sea when she had sat beside her mother and been told, in ink, that she would know. Fletcher came in from the garden at noon, still in his riding coat, and stood in the doorway listening. "She's almost got it," Orla said quietly. "There's a 3rd bar she keeps rushing. She'll get it." "Yes," Orla agreed, "she will." Outside, the first swallows of May crossed the lawn, and the waltz played on, uncertain and earnest and entirely its own. They had tried to make her nothing. They had burned her mother's music and taken her father's house and handed her back to the road with 2 shillings and a lie. What they had not taken, what could not be burned, could not be sewn into an apron and held up as evidence, was the thing Gwyneth had put into her before she died. Not the voice, though the voice was part of it. The knowledge, carried in the body, that what is true waits, that it does not always wait politely, or arrive on schedule, or spare you the wet road and the worn boots and the 12 miles on foot to say goodbye to someone you loved. But it keeps its appointment. It always does.